On Christmas night when I was 21, I knelt on the hardwood floor with a bloody lip while my stepmother struck me for wearing red like her. My father just watched and delivered a sentence that shattered my world. Now, standing in court as a defendant instead of a prosecutor, I listened to them accuse me of manipulating my grandfather. They do not know he recorded their 22 years of silence while I was the only one who stayed. My name is Fiona Torres, and for the last 7 years, I have walked into courtrooms with the weight of the Riverbend County Prosecutor's Office behind me. I am used to standing on the right side of the aisle, the side that represents the people, the state, and the law. I am used to the heavy, reassuring weight of a case file tucked under my arm, knowing I have the evidence to put bad people away. But today, the air inside the Lakeshore County Courthouse tasted different. It tasted like stale coffee and betrayal. Today, I did not badge my way through the employee entrance. I stood in line at the security checkpoint, emptied my pockets into a plastic bin, and walked through the metal detector just like every other civilian whose life was about to be dissected by a stranger in a black robe. I walked into courtroom 4 with my head high, ignoring the sudden drop in volume from the gallery. I wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored and severe, with a white silk blouse buttoned to the collar. No jewelry, no makeup aside from a swipe of mascara. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who treated the law as a religion. On the other side of the aisle, sitting at the plaintiff's table, were the two people who shared my DNA, but nothing of my soul. Daniel and Veronica Torres looked like they had stepped out of a catalog for the bereaved wealthy. My father, Daniel, wore a navy suit that I knew cost more than my first car. His face was a mask of practiced sorrow. His eyes cast downward as if the very weight of his grief was too much to bear. Next to him sat Veronica, my stepmother. She was dressed in black cashmere, a tasteful string of pearls resting against her collarbone. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, clutching my father's arm with a desperation that would have been touching if I did not know that the woman possessed the emotional depth of a puddle on a hot sidewalk. They were performing. It was a play, and they were the tragic heroes, the loving parents forced to sue their own ungrateful daughter to protect the legacy of a man they had ignored for 2 decades. Standing next to them was their attorney, Gregory Harlan. I knew of him. He was the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances until he made enough money to chase inheritances. He wore a pinstripe suit that was a little too tight across the shoulders and a watch that was far too large for his wrist. He looked at me with a smirk that he barely bothered to hide. To him, I was just a bitter, estranged daughter. He thought he was walking into a slaughter. He thought he was about to bully a civilian. He had no idea that he had just walked into a cage with a tiger. I took my seat at the defense table. The wood felt cool under my palms. I did not have a team of associates with me. I had a notepad and a pen. I sat alone. The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Amelia Brock presiding." The rustle of fabric filled the room as we stood. Judge Brock swept in, her face set in the grim line of a woman who had heard every lie ever told in the state of Illinois. She took the bench, adjusted her glasses, and opened the file in front of her. "Calling case number 492, she read, her voice bored. "Estate of Walter Hayes, petition to contest the validity of the last will and testament." She looked up, scanning the room. "Appearances?" Gregory Harlan stepped forward, radiating unearned confidence. "Gregory Harlan for the plaintiffs, Daniel and Veronica Torres, Your Honor." Judge Brock nodded and shifted her gaze to my table. "And for the defense?" I stood up. "Fiona Torres, Your Honor, representing myself." Judge Brock froze. Her eyes narrowed behind her spectacles. She leaned forward, squinting slightly as if she could not believe what she was seeing. We had never worked a case together directly, as I prosecuted in the neighboring county, but the legal community in this part of the state was small. Reputation traveled faster than paperwork. "Ms. Torres?" Judge Brock asked, her tone shifting from boredom to genuine confusion. "Assistant District Attorney Torres?" A ripple of whispers broke out in the gallery behind me. I could hear the scratching of pens and the low hum of gossip. It was not every day that a prosecutor sat in the defendant's chair in a high-profile inheritance case. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "I was not aware you were a party to this action," the judge said, glancing between me and the plaintiffs. "I am the sole beneficiary and executor of the estate, Your Honor," I replied, "and the defendant in this frivolous action." Gregory Harlan stiffened. The smirk vanished from his face. He turned his head sharply to look at Daniel and Veronica. They had clearly neglected to mention that the ungrateful daughter they were suing was a seasoned prosecutor who had put murderers on death row. I saw Daniel flinch. Veronica, however, just stared at me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the tears she had been faking seconds ago. "Very well," Judge Brock said, recovering her composure. "We are here for a preliminary hearing to set the schedule and address the motion to freeze the estate's assets. Mr. Harlan, you may proceed." Harlan cleared his throat, trying to regain his footing. He walked to the center of the room, buttoning his jacket. He had a smooth baritone voice that he clearly loved to hear. "Your Honor," Harlan began, gesturing dramatically toward my father and stepmother, "we are here today because a grave injustice has been done. My clients are the natural heirs of the late Walter Hayes. Daniel Torres is his son-in-law of 30 years. Veronica Torres is his only daughter, for decades. They loved and supported Mr. Hayes." I stared straight ahead, my face a mask of stone. Every word was a lie, but I let him speak. "However," Harlan continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "in the final years of his life, Mr. Hayes fell under the malign influence of the defendant. Fiona Torres took advantage of an old man's declining mental state. She isolated him. She cut him off from his loving family. She poisoned his mind with falsehoods and manipulated him into changing his will, cutting out the very people who loved him most to secure the entirety of the estate for herself." Harlan paused for effect, looking back at the gallery. "We intend to prove that the will in question is a product of undue influence and fraud. We are asking the court to freeze all assets immediately to prevent the defendant from dissipating the family fortune that she stole." Daniel buried his face in his hands. Veronica patted his back, looking up at the judge with wide, pleading eyes. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Judge Brock turned to me. "Ms. Torres, your response?" I stood up slowly. I did not pace. I did not wave my arms. I simply stood my ground, anchoring myself to the floor. "Your Honor," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without shouting, "Mr. Harlan tells a compelling story. It is a classic tragedy. The lonely patriarch, the greedy child, the heartbroken parents. But a courtroom is not a theater, and evidence is not a script." I walked around the table, stepping into the open space before the bench. "Counsel speaks of isolation," I said. "He claims I isolated my grandfather. The defense will present phone records, Your Honor, 22 years of phone records. They will show that in the last decade of Walter Hayes' life, the plaintiffs called him exactly 43 times. 40 of those calls lasted less than 3 minutes. The other 3 were requests for wire transfers." I heard a sharp intake of breath from the gallery. Gregory Harlan's jaw tightened. "Counsel speaks of undue influence," I continued, my eyes locking onto Veronica's. "They claim I manipulated my grandfather into loving me. Your Honor, I spent every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July, and every Easter at my grandfather's house in Maple Ridge. I was there when he had his hip surgery. I was there when my grandmother died. I was there to hold his hand when he took his last breath." I turned to look at my father. He refused to meet my gaze. "The plaintiffs," I said, pointing a finger at them, "were in Cabo San Lucas when my grandmother died. They were in Aspen when my grandfather was diagnosed with heart failure. They sent a card. I sent myself." I turned back to the judge. $13 million. That is the estimated value of the estate. They are not here for their father. They are here for the money they believe they are owed simply for existing. What they call manipulation, Your Honor, is 22 years of their absence and my presence. I did not steal their father. They threw him away, and I was the one who picked him up. The courtroom went dead silent. The air was sucked out of the room. It was the kind of silence that usually followed a guilty verdict. Daniel looked pale. Veronica's hand had stopped patting his back. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "I object to the characterization," Harlan sputtered, realizing he was losing the narrative in the first 10 minutes. "This is—" "Overruled," Judge Brock snapped. She looked at me with a new expression. It was not just surprise anymore, it was respect. The court takes the allegations of undue influence seriously. Mr. Harlan, but the defense raises valid points regarding the history of the relationship. I am not freezing the assets at this time. The executor is bonded and is an officer of the court. I trust Ms. Torres will not flee the country with the family silver." She banged her gavel. "We will move to discovery. Trial is set for 6 months from today. And counselors? Given the parties involved, I expect this will attract media attention. I want this tried in this courtroom, not on the 6 o'clock news. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," we chorused. Adjourned. I began packing my notepad. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had won the first skirmish, but the war had just begun. As I snapped my briefcase shut, I felt a presence beside me. I looked up to see Veronica standing there. The grieving daughter mask had slipped. Her lips were pulled back in a sneer that I remembered from my childhood. "You think you're so smart," she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You always were a little actress. You always loved standing in front of a crowd, making everyone look at you." She leaned in closer, the smell of her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. "Well, you got what you wanted, Fiona," she whispered. "Everyone is looking at you now. I hope you enjoy the show." The words hit me like a physical blow. The courtroom blurred for a split second. The smell of the old wood floor vanished, replaced by the scent of pine needles and metallic blood. You always want to be the center of attention. The memory flashed, bright, red, and violent. I blinked, forcing the present back into focus. I looked at Veronica. I did not flinch. I did not step back. "Save it for the deposition, Veronica," I said coldly. I brushed past her and walked out of the courtroom. The heavy double doors swung shut behind me, muffling the sound of Harlan trying to explain his failure to my father. The hallway was chaos. The local press had caught wind of the hearing. As soon as I stepped out, camera flashes popped like strobes. Microphones were thrust into my face. Ms. Torres! Is it true you coerced your grandfather? How do you respond to your father's claims? Are you going to resign from the prosecutor's office?" I kept walking, my eyes fixed on the exit. I needed air. I needed to get away from the suffocating reality of seeing my father's face again. A young reporter from the Chicago Tribune, a man with messy hair and a hunger in his eyes, blocked my path. "Ms. Torres," he shouted over the din, "your mother says you destroyed the relationship between her and her father out of jealousy. Is it true? Did you ruin their family?" I stopped. The question hung in the air. The crowd quieted. Sensing a quote, I looked directly into the lens of the camera over his shoulder. I saw my reflection in the glass. Calm, cold, untouchable. But beneath the gray suit, I could still feel the phantom sting of a split lip. "Tough question," I said, my voice level. "Did you ruin the relationship?" the reporter pressed. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "On Christmas night when I was 21 years old," I said, enunciating every word. "My stepmother beat me until I bled because I wore a red dress that looked like hers. She told me I was not family. My father watched and did nothing. From that night on, there was nothing left to ruin." I turned and walked out into the blinding white light of the afternoon, leaving the silence behind me, to understand why I stood in that courtroom today. You have to understand that I did not grow up in a house. I grew up in a home. They are different things entirely. My parents, Daniel and Veronica, owned a house, a sprawling, glass and steel structure in North Elmwood that looked like it belonged in an architectural digest. But my home was 2 hours north in Maple Ridge, Wisconsin, in a drafty Victorian with creaking floorboards and the smell of old paper and cinnamon tea. My parents did not abandon me in the traditional sense. They did not leave me in a basket on a doorstep. They did something more insidious. They outsourced me. When I was 3 years old, Daniel claimed that his business was in a critical growth phase and Veronica was overwhelmed with her social obligations and interior design career. They needed to stabilize their economy. They said, it was just for a few months. They said, those few months stretched into 18 years. My life in Maple Ridge was simple, but it was full. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, was a retired circuit court judge. To the rest of the world, he was a stern man who rarely smiled. To me, he was the compass by which I navigated the world. He did not teach me how to ride a bike or catch a ball. He taught me about justice. I remember sitting on the porch swing when I was 10 years old, watching a neighbor's dog dig up my grandmother's petunias. I wanted to go yell at the neighbor. Grandpa Walter put a hand on my shoulder and stopped me. He told me to consider intent versus negligence. He explained that the neighbor did not command the dog to destroy the flowers. He simply failed to secure the gate. It was a lesson on liability. It sounds dry to tell it now, but at the time, it made the world feel orderly. It made me feel safe. He taught me that anger was a wasted emotion unless it was channeled into a solution. And then there was Eleanor. My grandmother was the softness that balanced Walter's edges. She was the one who packed my lunch every morning, cutting the crusts off the sandwiches just the way I liked. She was the one who sat in the front row of every school play, clapping the loudest even when I was just a tree in the background. She made me feel like I was the center of the universe, not an inconvenience to be managed. My parents were different. They were like visiting dignitaries from a foreign country. They would drive up in a Mercedes that looked out of place on our gravel driveway, usually 3 or 4 times a year. They never stayed the night. They would sweep in, smelling of expensive leather and French perfume, and dump a pile of gifts on the table. The gifts were always wrong. They were expensive. Certainly, I received porcelain dolls that were too fragile to play with, silk scarves for a 7-year-old, and leather-bound journals that looked too nice to write in. They were gifts you buy for a concept of a child, not the actual child sitting in front of you. I learned early on to dread Veronica's visits. She was beautiful, in a sharp, manicured way. Every hair was in place, her nails were always perfect, and when she looked at me, her eyes were like scanners, searching for flaws. She would smooth my hair down aggressively and tell me I looked wild. She would pinch the fabric of my cotton shirts and ask Eleanor why she dressed me like a farmhand. She would try to put makeup on me when I was 12, and when I squirmed, she would sigh with a deep, dramatic exhaustion, as if my existence was a personal trial she had to endure. She wanted a miniature version of herself, a doll to dress up and show off. Instead, she got a girl who liked reading law books on the porch and had dirt under her fingernails from the garden. By the time I was 21, I thought things might be different. I was a senior in college, preparing for law school. I had done well. I had made law review. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that my achievements would finally earn me a seat at their table. I wanted to believe that the distance between us was just geography, not a fundamental lack of love. So when Daniel called and invited me to spend Christmas Eve at their house in North Elmwood, I said yes. He said they wanted the family together. He said it was time we reconnected. I drove down from Maple Ridge with a sense of cautious optimism. The night before I left, Grandma Eleanor had given me a dress. It was a simple thing, a deep crimson wool dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline. It was elegant and warm, perfect for a Wisconsin winter. Eleanor told me the color suited me, that it made me look strong. I packed it carefully, thinking it would be perfect for the formal dinner my parents were hosting. When I arrived at the North Elmwood house, the air was already thick with tension. The house was decorated like a department store window, silver and blue, cold and metallic. There was no smell of baking cookies, no warmth, just catering staff moving silently through the halls. I went to the guest room, my room, technically, though it had no trace of me in it, and changed for the party. I put on the red dress. I looked in the mirror and felt a surge of confidence. I looked like a woman who was about to become a lawyer. I looked like Walter and Eleanor's granddaughter. But when I walked down the grand staircase, the music seemed to stop. Veronica was standing by the fireplace holding a crystal flute of champagne. She was wearing a red dress. It was not the same dress, of course. Hers was silk, low-cut, and covered in sequins that caught the light. It was a dress that screamed for attention, but the color was identical, a deep, blood red. Her eyes locked onto me, and I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. It was irrational. It was childish. But in Veronica's world, she was the sun, and everyone else was just a planet orbiting her. I had committed the cardinal sin of matching the queen. She did not say anything immediately. There were guests arriving, business partners of my father, local politicians, neighbors they wanted to impress. Veronica pasted a smile on her face, but it was tight and brittle. All night, she made cutting remarks. She introduced me to people as Daniel's daughter, leaving her own name out of the equation. When a guest complimented my dress, Veronica let out a high, tinkling laugh and said, "Yes, isn't it quaint? It looks just like something from a vintage shop." I swallowed the insults. I smiled. I channeled Walter. Intent versus negligence. I told myself she was just stressed. I told myself to be the bigger person. The party wound down around midnight. The last guests drifted out into the snow, leaving the house silent except for the clinking of the catering staff clearing glasses in the kitchen. I was in the living room, kneeling on the floor to pick up a napkin someone had dropped. I was trying to be helpful. I was trying to show that I was a good daughter. Veronica walked in. The guests were gone. The performance was over. "You did that on purpose," she said. Her voice was not a scream. It was a low tremble. I looked up, confused. "What?" "The dress," she spat. "You saw what I was wearing. You knew I was wearing red. You just had to come in here and try to steal the spotlight, didn't you?" "I didn't know," I said, standing up. "Grandma gave me this dress. I didn't know what you were wearing." "Grandma," she mocked, her face twisting. "That old woman has no taste, and neither do you. You walk around here with that superior look on your face, acting like you are better than us because you read books and live in a shack in Wisconsin." "Veronica, please," I said, stepping back. "It's Christmas." "It is my party," she screamed, closing the distance between us. "You are just like your mother. You love playing the victim. You take our money. You let us pay your tuition. But you look down on us. You think you are so moral, so righteous." She was drunk. I could smell the champagne and bitterness on her breath. "I don't think that," I said, my voice shaking. "I just wanted to see my dad." "You wanted to humiliate me." Her hand moved faster than I expected. The slap cracked through the room like a gunshot. It caught me on the cheekbone, stinging and sharp. My head snapped to the side. I stood there, stunned. I was 21 years old. I was not a child to be disciplined. I turned to look at her, my hand going to my face. "Don't you look at me like that," she hissed. She lunged forward. She grabbed my shoulders and shoved me. I stumbled back, my heels catching on the rug. I fell hard, my shoulders slamming into the edge of the heavy oak coffee table. Pain exploded down my arm. Before I could scramble up, she hit me again, a frantic, flailing blow to my back, then another to my arm. "Get out," she screamed. "Get out of my sight." I scrambled backward on the hardwood floor. My lips split from where I had bitten it in the fall, or maybe from her hand. I could not tell. I tasted copper. I looked up, gasping for air, hoping for salvation. My father was standing in the doorway of the dining room. He was holding a glass of scotch. He was leaning against the doorframe, watching. He had seen it all. He had seen his wife strike his daughter. He had seen me fall. "Dad," I whispered. The word came out broken. Daniel Torres looked at me. He looked at the blood on my lip. He looked at his wife, who was panting, her chest heaving, her red sequins shimmering like armor. He took a sip of his drink. "Fiona," he said. His voice was calm. It was the voice he used to negotiate business deals. "Don't make it worse." I froze. "What?" "Don't make a scene," he said, walking over to stand beside Veronica. He did not check to see if I was hurt. He put a hand on Veronica's back to steady her. "It is just a dress. Fiona, why do you always have to provoke her? You know how she gets when she is stressed." I stared at him. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. "Provoke her?" I choked out. "She hit me." Daniel sighed, looking at his watch as if I were wasting his time. "She is upset. It is Christmas. Just go upstairs, or leave. Just don't turn my wife's day into your drama." Your drama. That was the moment it broke. The thin, fragile thread that had tethered me to them for 2 decades snapped. It wasn't the slap. Physical pain fades. Bruises heal. But the indifference? The realization that my father saw my pain as an inconvenience to his wife's mood? That was terminal. I looked at him. I really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time. I saw a weak man in an expensive suit. A man who would burn his own child to keep himself warm. I stood up. My knees were shaking. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I did not scream. I did not fight back. I did not give them the reaction they wanted. "Okay," I said. I turned around and walked to the front door. I did not get my coat. I did not get my bag. I opened the heavy wooden door and stepped out into the night. The cold hit me like a physical wall. It was 10 degrees below zero. Snow was falling softly, covering the perfectly manicured lawn in a blanket of white. I walked down the driveway, my heels sinking into the snow, the red wool dress providing no protection against the biting wind. I walked for 3 miles to the nearest gas station. I sat on a plastic crate by the air pump, shivering uncontrollably, blood drying on my chin, and used the payphone to call Maple Ridge. Grandpa Walter answered on the second ring. "Fiona?" he asked. His voice was rough with sleep. "Grandpa," I said, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely form the words. "I need you to come get me." He did not ask why. He did not ask what happened. He just said, "I am on my way." I sat there in the snow, watching the red taillights of cars passing on the highway, and I made a vow. I vowed that I would never set foot in that house again. I vowed that I would never let anyone treat me like an accessory to their life again. And I vowed that one day, Daniel and Veronica Torres would understand that family is not a word you use to hide your sins. It is a verdict. And I had just delivered mine. The drive back to Maple Ridge that night is a blur in my memory. A long tunnel of white snow and black asphalt, illuminated only by the rhythmic sweep of my windshield wipers. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway of the Victorian house that had always been my true north, it was 3 a.m. The house was dark, save for a single light burning in the kitchen window. They had been waiting up. Grandma Eleanor met me at the door. She did not gasp. She did not scream. She simply opened the door, pulled me inside out of the biting wind, and wrapped her arms around me. She smelled of lavender laundry detergent and vanilla, a scent that instantly loosened the tight knot of adrenaline in my chest. She took my coat, her eyes landing immediately on the darkening bruise blooming on my shoulder and the swollen cut on my lip. Her jaw tightened, a small muscle feathering near her ear, but she did not ask for the gruesome details. Not yet. She led me to the kitchen table, the wood worn smooth by decades of family meals, and set a mug of hot chocolate in front of me. It was not a packet mix. It was real cocoa, melted with milk and a dash of cinnamon, just the way she had made it when I was 7 and scraped my knee. She sat opposite me, wrapping her hands around her own mug. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, but it was not the suffocating silence of the house in North Elmwood. This was a safe silence. "You do not need to go back there, Fiona," she said softly. It was not a question. It was a permission slip. I looked up at her, tears finally spilling over. "He just stood there, Grandma. He just watched." "I know," she said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was iron. And that is why you are done. We do not beg for love in this house, and we certainly do not bleed for it. The next morning, Grandpa Walter found me on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, staring at the snow-covered yard. He brought 2 cups of coffee. He sat down in the rocking chair beside me, the wood groaning familiarly under his weight. He looked at my face, his eyes assessing the damage with the clinical precision of a man who had spent 40 years on the bench. "Assault and battery," he said quietly, staring out at the frozen oak tree. "In the state of Wisconsin, battery is the intentional causation of bodily harm to another without consent. It is a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to 9 months in prison and a fine of $10,000. I looked at him, surprised by the legal lecture. "It changes when there is a domestic relationship," he continued, taking a sip of his coffee. "It becomes a betrayal of the highest order. The law tries to account for it. Fiona, we have restraining orders. We have enhancements for domestic abuse, but the law is an imperfect shield. It can punish the act, but it cannot fix the heart." He turned to look at me then. "You are angry." "I am furious," I admitted, my voice shaking. "Good," he said, nodding. "Anger is fuel. Grief is just a heavy coat that slows you down. But anger? Anger is an engine. You are going to law school in the fall. You are going to learn how the system works. You are going to learn that when people cannot protect themselves, we use words, statutes, and precedents to build a wall around them. You let that anger drive you. Do not let it eat you alive. Use it." That conversation shifted something in my tectonic plates. I stopped feeling like a victim who had been slapped at a party. I started feeling like a prosecutor in training. I threw myself into my final semester of college, and then into law school. I studied with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. While my classmates were out drinking on Friday nights, I was in the library, memorizing case law on inheritance, on fraud, on elder abuse. I graduated at the top of my class. When I passed the bar exam, I accepted a position at the Riverbend County Prosecutor's Office. It was not the most glamorous job. The pay was modest. The hours were long, but it was close to home. I bought a small apartment in town, a 20-minute drive from Maple Ridge. Every Sunday, without fail, I drove to my grandparents' house for dinner. It became our liturgy. Sunday dinners were sacred. Eleanor would make a pot roast or a chicken pie, and Walter would open a bottle of red wine. We would sit there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. I would tell them about my cases, the petty thefts, the DUIs, and eventually, the more serious assaults. Walter would offer advice, citing cases from the 70s that were still relevant. Eleanor would tell me about the garden club or the gossip from the church choir. It was mundane. It was boring to some, perhaps, but to me, it was oxygen. It was the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of being loved. In contrast, the silence from North Elmwood was deafening. For the first few months after that Christmas, I waited for an apology. It never came. Then, I waited for a regular check-in. That never came either. Daniel and Veronica retreated into their own world. They called, of course, but the calls followed a predictable, sickening pattern. They would ring the landline at Maple Ridge usually on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. "Hi, Dad," Walter would say, putting the phone on speaker so Eleanor could hear. "How are things?" "Busy, busy," Daniel's voice would crackle through the line, always sounding rushed, always sounding like he was doing us a favor by sparing 3 minutes. "Business is expanding again. Listen, Walter, I have a small liquidity issue with the new warehouse, just a temporary cash flow gap. I was wondering if we could borrow against the trust early? Just $50,000. I will pay it back in 6 months. Walter would sigh, a sound that seemed to deflate his entire chest. He would look at Eleanor. She would purse her lips but nod. "I will wire it tomorrow, Daniel," Walter would say. "Thanks, Dad. You're a lifesaver. We must come visit soon. Maybe Easter?" "That would be nice," Walter would say. Easter would come and go. No Daniel, no Veronica. Just a flower arrangement sent via a delivery service with a pre-printed card. This happened again and again. Summer vacation, Thanksgiving, another loan request, another promise to visit, another no-show. I watched my grandparents age in the quiet spaces between these phone calls. I watched Walter's hands start to tremor slightly when he held his coffee cup. I watched Eleanor move a little slower in the garden, her knees bothering her more than she admitted. It was during one of these Sunday dinners, about 3 years after the red dress Christmas, that I noticed Eleanor writing in a small, leather-bound notebook she kept by the phone in the hallway. "What are you writing, Grandma?" I asked, drying a dish as she sat by the telephone table. She looked up, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "I am keeping the score. Fiona." I walked over and looked. It was not a game score. It was a log. June 12th, Daniel called, asked for $20,000 for a bridge loan, said they would come for the 4th of July weekend. Result: check sent, did not come. Reason given: Veronica had a migraine. August 4th, Fiona came for dinner, brought peach cobbler, fixed the leaking tap in the bathroom, stayed until 10. She had been doing this for years, pages and pages of entries. On the left side, the North Elmwood column, filled with requests for money and broken promises. On the right side, the Fiona column, filled with dinners, movie nights, doctor's appointments, and simple, unrequested presents. "Why?" I asked, running my finger over the neat cursive. "Because memory is a tricky thing," Eleanor said, closing the book firmly. "People like to rewrite history to suit themselves. They like to say they were there when they were not. One day, someone might ask who was really part of this family. I want to make sure the record is accurate." I did not know it then, but Walter and Eleanor had already taken legal steps to ensure that record would stand. They had met with their estate attorney, a sharp woman named Marcia Lowell, and established the Hayes Integrity Trust. They moved the deed to the house, their retirement savings, and Walter's investment portfolio into the trust. And they named me, Fiona Torres, as the sole beneficiary and the executor. They did not tell me. They did not want me to feel obligated to care for them because of a future paycheck. They wanted to see if I would stay simply because I loved them, and I did. I stayed through the milestones that my parents missed. When I graduated from law school, I had 4 tickets. Walter and Eleanor sat in the front row. The 2 seats beside them remained empty. I remember walking across the stage to accept my diploma, looking out into the sea of faces, and seeing the gap in the line where my parents should have been. It stung, but then I saw Walter beaming, giving me a thumbs up, and the sting faded. When I was sworn in as an assistant district attorney, Walter stood next to me. He was the one who held the Bible. Daniel sent a text message 2 hours after the ceremony ended. "Congrats, kiddo. Big merger happening today. Celebrate for us." That night, over a celebratory dinner at a steakhouse in Madison, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. "Am I crazy?" I asked, cutting into my filet. "Am I holding a grudge? Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe I should have just driven down there and forced myself back into their lives." Walter set his fork down. He took a sip of water and looked me dead in the eye. "Fiona," he said, his voice low and serious, "there is a biological definition of a parent, and there is a functional definition. Biology is easy. It is a biological act that takes minutes. Parenting is showing up. It is sitting in a cold auditorium for 3 hours to watch your kid walk across a stage for 10 seconds. It is answering the phone when you are tired. It is being there." He reached across the table and tapped my hand. "You are not holding a grudge. You are holding a standard, and they failed to meet it." The years rolled on. I rose through the ranks at the prosecutor's office. I became known as a tough but fair litigator. I put away domestic abusers. I fought for victims who had been silenced. I built a life that was full of purpose. But time is a thief, and it came for Maple Ridge eventually. It started with Eleanor. A stroke in the middle of the night. I was the one Walter called. I was the one who raced to the hospital at 4 in the morning, still wearing my pajamas under my coat. I was the one who sat by her bedside for 3 days while she drifted in and out of consciousness. I called Daniel. "Mom had a stroke," I told him. "It is bad." "Oh, God," he said. "That is terrible. Is she stable?" "She is in the ICU," I said. "You need to come." I can't get away until the weekend," he stammered. "Veronica has a gala she is chairing, and we have donors coming into town. But keep us posted. We will send flowers." Flowers, again. Eleanor recovered, but she was never quite the same. She lost some mobility in her left hand. Her speech was slightly slower. I hired a part-time nurse to help during the day, paying for it out of my own salary because I didn't want to dip into their savings. Then, 6 months later, Walter fainted in the garden. Congestive heart failure. The diagnosis was grim. His heart was operating at 30% capacity. It was as if a signal had gone out on a frequency only vultures could hear. Suddenly, the phone at Maple Ridge started ringing more often. Daniel and Veronica were checking in, but the conversations were different now. They weren't asking for small loans anymore. They were asking big-picture questions. "So, Dad," Daniel would say on speakerphone while I sat in the corner reading a case file, "have you thought about downsizing? That house is huge. The upkeep must be a nightmare. Veronica knows a great realtor who specializes in historic properties. We could sell it. Move you into a nice facility closer to us in North Elmwood." "We are fine here. Daniel," Walter would rasp, his breath short. "Well, we just need to be practical," Veronica chimed in on the other line. "You know, with your health, we need to make sure the assets are managed properly. Have you looked at your portfolio lately? Daniel has a great guy who could restructure things for better yield." They smelled blood in the water. They knew the end was coming, and they wanted to position themselves to catch the inheritance when it fell. They started talking about our family home and our legacy, words they had not used in 20 years. I listened to these calls, my stomach churning with acid. I wanted to grab the phone and scream at them. I wanted to tell them they had no right to plan the sale of a house they hadn't visited in a decade. But Walter would just look at me, wink, and say, "We will think about it. Daniel, we will let you know." One afternoon, after a particularly aggressive call where Veronica had suggested moving Eleanor into a budget-friendly nursing home to save equity, Walter beckoned me to his study. He was sitting in his leather armchair, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His breathing was labored. "Fiona," he said, pointing to the bottom drawer of his desk. "Open that." I knelt and opened the drawer. Inside was a large manila envelope sealed with red wax. "That is for later," he said, "for after. But I want you to know something now." He leaned forward, resting his hand on my head like a benediction. "They think I am senile," he whispered, a mischievous glint returning to his tired eyes. "They think I am an old man who has forgotten who was here and who was not. They think the money will make up for the time." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, but he smiled. "They are going to be very surprised, Fiona, very surprised indeed." I did not know the details of what was in the envelope, but I squeezed his hand, feeling the fragile bones beneath the skin. "I am here, Grandpa," I said. "I am not going anywhere." "I know," he said, closing his eyes. "That is all that ever mattered." We sat there in the quiet of the study, surrounded by his law books and the ticking of the grandfather clock, while 200 miles away, my parents were likely calculating the square footage price of the house that had been my only refuge. They were planning their windfall. They had no idea that for the last 20 years, while they were busy chasing status, Walter and Eleanor had been quietly building a fortress of evidence against them, and the walls of that fortress were made of paper, memory, and the simple, undeniable truth of who had shown up. Grandma Eleanor left us on a Tuesday morning in late October. It was not a dramatic exit. There were no machines beeping frantically, no rush of doctors. She simply went to sleep in her favorite chair by the window, watching the maple leaves turn that brilliant, burning orange she loved so much, and she did not wake up. The funeral was held 3 days later at the small stone chapel in Maple Ridge. The pews were filled with people who actually knew her. There was Mrs. Higgins from the bakery, the entire garden club, and the librarian who had set aside mystery novels for her for 30 years. I sat in the front row next to Grandpa Walter. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He held my hand so tightly I thought my bones might crack, but I did not pull away. Daniel and Veronica arrived 20 minutes late. They swept into the church just as the pastor was finishing the eulogy. Their entrance was a disruption, a rustle of expensive fabric and the click of heels on stone that made heads turn. They sat in the second row, behind us. They did not touch Walter. They did not kneel. At the reception afterward in the church hall, they stayed for exactly 45 minutes. Daniel spent the entire time on his phone, pacing in the hallway, talking about a merger and critical timelines. Veronica stood by the coffee urn, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, complaining to Mrs. Higgins that the reception hall smelled of damp wool. "We have to head back," Daniel told me, checking his Rolex. "Traffic into the city is a nightmare this time of day. Tell Dad we said goodbye. We will call him next week." They did not call next week. Walter lasted 4 months without her. The doctors called it heart failure, but I knew it was a failure of the will to exist in a world where she was not. He died in his study, sitting at his heavy oak desk, surrounded by his case files and a half-finished cup of tea. I found him. I was the one who called the coroner. I was the one who selected the casket to match Eleanor's. I was the one who wrote the obituary. Daniel and Veronica sent a wreath. It was an enormous, garish arrangement of white lilies that looked like it belonged in a mob movie. The card read, "With deepest sympathy, Daniel and Veronica." It was the kind of arrangement you send to a business associate, not a father. 2 days after Walter was buried, I sat in the office of Marcia Lowell. Marcia was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for being the toughest estate attorney in the county. She had been Walter's friend for 40 years. She slid a thick document across the mahogany desk toward me. "This is the last will and testament of Walter Hayes," Marcia said. Her voice was steady, professional, but there was a softness in her eyes. "Along with the founding documents of the Hayes Integrity Trust." I looked at the paperwork. "I assume my father will want a copy." "He will get what the law requires," Marcia said, "but he is not going to like it." She opened the folder. Walter and Eleanor updated their estate plan 5 years ago. Fiona, they liquidated almost all their liquid assets and moved them, along with the deed to the Maple Ridge house, into the trust. She paused, locking eyes with me. "You are the sole beneficiary of the Hayes Integrity Trust. You are also the named executor of the estate." I blinked. "Everything?" "Everything," Marcia confirmed. "The house, the savings, the investment portfolio, the insurance policies. The total value is approximately $13 million. "And my parents?" I asked. Marcia flipped a page. "To my son, Daniel Torres, and his wife, Veronica, I leave the sum of $1,000 each, a sum I deem sufficient for their travel expenses to attend my funeral, should they choose to do so." The room went silent. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It was not the money. It was the message. It was a final gavel bang from a judge who had seen all the evidence. "They are going to be furious," I whispered. "They are going to be nuclear," Marcia corrected. "But Walter wanted you to know why he did this. He left something for you, in his study." I drove back to the empty house in Maple Ridge. The silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of my childhood. I walked into the study. It smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco, a scent that made my chest ache. On the corner of the desk sat a wooden box. It was hand-carved cherry wood. I recognized it. Walter had kept his most important keepsakes in it. I sat in his chair. It still felt like it was holding his shape, and opened the box. Inside, there was no money. There were notebooks, 6 of them. Small, black moleskin notebooks, the kind he used to carry in his pocket. I opened the first one. It was dated 20 years ago. February 14th. Daniel called, said the business is underwater, needs $10,000 for payroll. Sent check number 402. Note: he arrived in a new Porsche when he visited in April. July 6th. Veronica called, crying, said she needs $5,000 for a specialized medical treatment. Sent wire transfer. Note: saw photos on social media of them in Tuscany 2 weeks later. I flipped through the pages. It was a ledger of lies. Every single time they had called, every sob story, every emergency loan was recorded. And next to each entry, Walter had written a note. He had checked. He had verified. He knew. He knew they were lying, and he gave them the money anyway. Why? The answer was in the margins. Maybe if I help, they will bring Fiona to visit more often. My heart broke. He had been paying a ransom for me. I put the notebook down. My hands trembling. I turned to his computer. I knew the password. It was the date of their wedding. I logged in and found a folder on the desktop simply labeled The Evidence. I clicked it open. It was organized with the precision of a criminal investigation. There was a subfolder titled Veronica, Requests. Inside were hundreds of emails. Dad, we are so desperate. Dad, the market crashed. Dad, we just need a little help to get by. And right next to that folder was another one titled Reality. It contained screenshots from Facebook and Instagram. Veronica showing off a new Birkin bag the same week she claimed they could not pay their mortgage. Daniel at a high-stakes poker table in Vegas the same month he claimed he needed money for my tuition that I was paying with student loans. I scrolled down until I found a document titled Journal. Personal. I opened it and searched for the date. Christmas. The year I was 21. The entry was short. December 26th. Fiona called at 3 a.m. She was at a gas station. She was freezing. She would not tell me what happened, but her lip was cut and she was terrified. Veronica called this morning. She told me Fiona got drunk and ruined the party. She said Fiona attacked her. She called Fiona a jealous little homewrecker. I do not know the truth of the room, but I know the truth of the people. Fiona does not drink. Fiona does not attack. I asked Daniel what happened. He said, "It was just drama, Dad. Ignore it." I will not ignore it. My granddaughter never came back to their house. That tells me everything I need to know. I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. He had known. He hadn't pressed me because he wanted to give me dignity, but he had known they were lying. At the bottom of the wooden box, there was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with his ring. On the front, in his impeccable cursive, was written, "To the presiding probate judge." I picked it up. It was heavy. I broke the seal. It was a letter, a sworn affidavit, essentially, to the court. I, Walter Hayes, being of sound mind and body, write this to explain the disposition of my assets. I anticipate that my daughter and son-in-law will contest my will. They will claim I was senile. They will claim I was manipulated. They will claim that blood entitles them to the fruit of my labor. They are wrong. I have spent 40 years on the bench. I have learned that justice is not about what you say. It is about what you do. For 22 years, my daughter Veronica and her husband Daniel have been absent. They treated me as a bank and my late wife as a nuisance. They missed birthdays. They missed anniversaries. They missed the slow decline of our health. Fiona Torres was the only one who was there. She fixed the leaking roof. She drove us to doctors. She sat with us in the silence. She did not ask for a penny. She gave us the only currency that matters to an old person: time. I am leaving everything to Fiona. Not because I love her more, though I do, but because she is the only one who earned the title of family. This is not a gift. It is restitution for the parents she deserved but did not get. Signed, Walter Hayes. I lowered the letter. The room felt different. The air was charged. This was not just a will. This was an indictment. Walter had prepared a case. He knew that one day I would be standing in a courtroom facing them. He knew they would come for the money. and he had spent his final years gathering the ammunition I would need to fight them. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me a weapon. My phone buzzed. It was Marcia. "Fiona," she said, her voice tight. "I just got off the phone with Gregory Harlan. He is representing your father. They are filing an injunction. They are claiming you coerced Walter into changing the will while he was mentally incompetent. They are going to paint you as a predator." I looked at the stacks of notebooks. I looked at the screenshots. I looked at the letter in my hand. I remembered the feel of the snow on my legs at the gas station. I remembered the sting of Veronica's slap. I remembered Daniel sipping his scotch while I bled. "Let them file," I said. My voice was cold. It was the voice of the prosecutor. "Let them come." "Fiona, this is going to be ugly," Marcia warned. "They are going to drag your name through the mud. The press will eat this up. Are you ready for this?" I closed the wooden box. I ran my hand over the smooth cherry wood. "Marcia," I said, "they think they are suing a granddaughter. They have no idea they just indicted a prosecutor." "I will see you in my office tomorrow," Marcia said. "Tomorrow," I agreed. I hung up. I sat in the dark study for a long time. I was not afraid. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but beside it was something else, a burning, cold clarity. I picked up the first notebook, the Ledger of Neglect, and opened my laptop. Exhibit A, I thought. The trial had not technically started, but the investigation was already closed. Walter had done the work. Now, all I had to do was present the case. I looked at the empty chair where he used to sit. "Rest easy, Grandpa," I whispered into the silence. "I've got it from here." The first strike did not happen in a courtroom. It did not happen with a subpoena or a deposition notice. It happened on a Tuesday morning, right next to my coffee cup, on page 3 of the Metro section of the Chicago Tribune. I remember the smell of the ink. I remember the way the paper felt thin and cheap between my fingers. And I remember the headline, bold and black, screaming a lie to the entire city. "Heartbroken Mother Robbed of Legacy" by Prosecutor Daughter. Below the headline was a photograph. It was a masterpiece of staging. Veronica was sitting on a beige sofa, clutching a framed photograph of Walter to her chest. She was wearing a high-necked black sweater. Her hair pulled back in a modest bun, devoid of makeup. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. She looked fragile. She looked devastated. She looked nothing like the woman who had slapped me across the face for wearing red, or the woman who had spent the last decade complaining that visiting her father was a logistical nightmare. I read the article, and my stomach turned over with each sentence. "We just want to understand why," Veronica Torres says, wiping a tear. "My father and I were so close, but in the last few years, Fiona changed. She started blocking our calls. She told Dad that we didn't love him. She poisoned his mind against his own flesh and blood. It is like she brainwashed him to steal everything." Brainwashed. I set the paper down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like it could melt the Formica table. The article did not mention the 22 years of missed holidays. It did not mention the $650,000 they had siphoned out of him. It certainly did not mention the night I knelt on a hardwood floor with a bleeding lip. It painted a clear, cinematic picture: the elderly, vulnerable grandfather, the loving, helpless parents, and the villain, the cold, calculating prosecutor who used her legal knowledge to manipulate a senile man into signing away his fortune. By noon, the narrative had jumped from print to broadcast. Daniel appeared on Wake Up Chicago, a local talk show that usually focused on weather patterns and adopting shelter dogs. Today, they were doing a special segment on elder abuse and family betrayal. I watched it on the small television in the break room at the prosecutor's office. Several of my colleagues were pretending to work, but I knew they were listening. Daniel was wearing a soft gray sweater, no suit. He wanted to look approachable. He wanted to look like a dad. "It is not about the money," Daniel said, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. "We don't care about the money. We have our own lives. It is about losing my daughter." Fiona used to be such a sweet girl, but after she went to law school, she became so cold. She cut us out. I think she wanted to punish us for being successful. I just want her to remember that we are still her family." The host nodded sympathetically. "It sounds like a classic case of alienation. Daniel, it is heartbreaking." "It is," Daniel whispered. "I just hope she sees this and knows we forgive her. We just want to do what is right for Dad's memory." I turned the TV off. The screen went black, but the damage was done. My phone started pinging, notifications from social media. I made the mistake of looking at the comments under the online version of the Tribune article. Typical lawyer. Greed is in their DNA. How can a daughter do that to her parents? Disgusting. She is a prosecutor? She should be disbarred. If she can steal from her grandpa, imagine what she does in court. The cold-blooded bitch needs to go down. They were dissecting a version of me that did not exist. They were rewriting my life. That afternoon, the formal legal attack arrived. A courier delivered a thick envelope to Marcia Lowell's office, and she forwarded it to me immediately. It was a petition to contest the will, filed by Gregory Harlan on behalf of Daniel and Veronica Torres. The cause of action was bold and specific: undue influence. They were claiming that Walter Hayes, in his final years, lacked the mental capacity to make independent decisions, and that I, Fiona Torres, had used my position of trust and my legal background to coerce him into disinheriting his natural children. I sat in my office, the petition lying on my desk next to a stack of case files for a robbery trial I was supposed to be prepping. I realized then that I could not fight this alone. I was a prosecutor. I prosecuted criminals. I did not defend civil suits, and I certainly could not represent myself in a case where I was the primary witness. I was too close. I was too angry. I needed a shark, but I did not want a shark who smelled like money. I needed a shark who smelled like truth. I called Noah Mercer. Noah and I had gone to law school together, while I had gone into criminal law to put bad guys in jail. Noah had gone into civil litigation to stop bad guys from keeping their money. He was brilliant, cynical, and messy. His office was a chaotic explosion of paper, but he never lost a fact. I met him at his firm in downtown Chicago that evening. It was raining, a cold, gray drizzle that matched my mood. Noah was sitting behind a desk buried under depositions, wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a tie that had been loosened hours ago. He read the Tribune article, then he read Walter's will, and finally, he read the petition filed by Harlan. He leaned back in his chair, linking his hands behind his head. "They are good," Noah said. "I mean, they are evil, but strategically, they are good." "They are lying," I snapped. "Doesn't matter," Noah said, spinning a pen on the desk. "In the court of public opinion, the truth is just a rumor. In a courtroom, the truth is whatever the jury believes. Right now, the jury sees a rich couple crying about their dad and a prosecutor who took it all." He leaned forward, his face serious. "Here is the play. Fiona, they know they probably can't win on the merits. Proving undue influence is hard, especially with Marcia Lowell involved. She is bulletproof. But they don't need to win a verdict. They just need to destroy you." "Destroy me?" "You are an assistant district attorney," Noah pointed out. "Your currency is your reputation. If they drag this out, if they paint you as a manipulator who preys on the elderly, your credibility in your own job evaporates. How can you stand in front of a jury and ask them to trust you when the morning paper says you swindled your grandpa? They are betting that the pressure will get too high. They are betting you will settle. They want you to cut them a check for $5 or $6 million just to make it go away so you can keep your career." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "This is blackmail." "It is litigation," Noah corrected. "To them, it is the same thing. Harlan is going to depose you. He is going to ask about your finances. He is going to ask about your relationship with your parents. He is going to try to make you look unstable." Noah paused, looking at me carefully. "Fiona, if we fight this, everything comes out, and I mean everything. You can't just say, 'I was there and they weren't.' You have to prove why the estrangement happened. You have to tell the story you have been hiding. If there are skeletons, Harlan is going to make them dance. Are you ready for that? I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement. I thought about the red dress. For 7 years, I had buried that night. I had never told anyone the full details, not even Noah. It was humiliating. To admit that I, a woman who put domestic abusers behind bars, had been slapped and beaten by my stepmother while my father watched. To admit that I had walked 3 miles in the snow because I was too proud to beg for a ride. It felt like weakness. It felt like a crack in the armor I had built so carefully. If I went to court, I would have to tell that story. I would have to let the world know that the cold prosecutor was actually a bruised daughter. Maybe I should settle, I said, my voice quiet. Maybe I should just give them half. It is Walter's money. But is it worth my life? Noah did not answer. He let the question hang there. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw the gray suit. I saw the prosecutor. And then, for a second, I saw the 21-year-old girl with the split lip. I thought about the oath I took when I was sworn in. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution, that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office. I had spent my entire adult life fighting for people who could not fight for themselves. I told victims to be brave. I told them to stand up and point at the person who hurt them. I told them that the truth was the only thing that could clean a wound. Was I a hypocrite? Was I going to let Daniel and Veronica Torres bully me into silence just because I was afraid of looking vulnerable? Walter had not left me that money so I could pay them off. He had left me that money, and those notebooks, because he trusted me to finish the fight he couldn't have. He had collected the evidence because he knew this day would come. If I settled, I wasn't just losing the money, I was validating their lie. I would be admitting that their absence was equal to my presence. I turned back to Noah. No, I said. Noah stopped spinning his pen. No? I am not settling, I said. Not a dime, not a single penny. I walked back to the desk and placed my hands on the wood, leaning in. They want a war? Fine. They are used to fighting for money. I am used to fighting for life. They have no idea what the difference is. Noah smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile. That is the client I wanted to see. Where do we start? I asked. We need a narrative, Noah said, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. They have the heartbroken family story. We need the reality story. We need to document every single day of the last 22 years. I can do better than that, I said. I have the receipts. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a photocopy of one of Walter's notebooks. I slid it across the desk to Noah. My grandfather was a judge. Noah. He didn't just get mad. He built a docket. Noah picked up the page, scanning the entries. June 12th. Daniel called. Needs $20K. Did not visit. His eyes widened. There are 6 of them, I said. Plus emails, plus bank records, plus a sworn affidavit explaining exactly why he cut them out. This is not just a defense, Noah said, looking up at me with genuine awe. This is an autopsy of a relationship. They want to talk about undue influence, I said, my voice steady and cold. Let's talk about influence. Let's talk about the influence of greed versus the influence of love. We are going to build a timeline. Noah, a side-by-side comparison. Every time I was there, and every time they weren't, every time I fixed a faucet, and every time they asked for a wire transfer, we are going to put their 22 years of abandonment on trial. Noah grabbed a marker and walked to the whiteboard on his wall. He drew a line down the middle. On the left, he wrote the Taurus fiction. On the right, he wrote the Hayes reality. What is the first entry? Noah asked, uncapping the marker. Christmas Eve, I said. 7 years ago. The night of the estrangement, Noah said. What happened? I took a deep breath. It was time. Veronica was wearing a red dress, I began. And so was I. As I told him the story, the slap, the fall, the blood, the silence of my father, Noah wrote it down. He didn't look pitying. He looked angry. He looked like a lawyer who had just found the smoking gun. By the time we left the office, it was after midnight. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean. I checked my phone. Another dozen nasty comments had rolled in. Another article had been posted, this one interviewing a family friend who claimed I was always difficult. I put the phone in my pocket, let them talk, let them spin their stories, let them enjoy their moment in the sun. They were fighting a PR battle. I was preparing for a trial. They thought they were suing a daughter who would crumble under the shame. They forgot that I was a prosecutor, and I knew exactly how to build a case that would hang them with their own rope. The war did not stay in the newspapers. It bled into the courtroom, and then it bled into my career. Gregory Harlan was not a brilliant lawyer, but he was a messy one. He operated on the principle that if you threw enough mud at the wall, the sheer weight of it would eventually bring the house down. 3 days after the article in the Tribune, he filed an emergency motion to freeze the assets of the Hayes Integrity Trust. In his filing, he argued that I, as the sole executor and beneficiary, presented a significant flight risk and a danger of dissipation. He claimed that because I was unmarried and had no children, facts he highlighted with a strange, sneering emphasis, I had no ties to the community and was likely to liquidate the estate and vanish to a non-extradition country. It was absurd. I was an assistant district attorney. My entire life, my reputation, and my pension were anchored in Riverbend County, but the accusation alone was enough to spook the bank. They administratively locked the trust accounts pending the judge's ruling. "He is trying to starve you out," Noah told me over a lukewarm takeout dinner in his office. "He knows you are paying my retainer out of your own pocket. If he locks up the estate money for 6 months, he figures you will run out of cash and be forced to settle just to stop the bleeding." "I have savings," I said, stabbing a piece of broccoli with my fork. "I can last." "Can you?" Noah asked. "Because that is not his only move." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a formal notice from the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission. My stomach dropped. "Anonymous complaint," Noah said, "alleging that you are using state resources, police databases, investigators, office software, to dig up dirt on your father and stepmother for a private civil suit. That is a disparable offense. Fiona." "I haven't done that," I said, my voice rising. "I haven't run a single background check. I haven't asked a single cop for a favor. I have kept a Chinese wall between my job and this case." "I know that," Noah said calmly, "but they don't, and just the investigation is enough to get you suspended." The next morning, I was summoned to the office of Caroline Vega, the state's attorney for Riverbend County. Caroline was a woman who did not believe in small talk. She sat behind her desk, looking at me with eyes that could peel paint off a wall. "Fiona," she said, "I have reporters calling my press secretary asking if my office is being used as a personal vendetta machine for one of my ADAs. I have the disciplinary commission asking for your login logs. What the hell is going on?" "It is a lie, Caroline," I said. "My parents are suing me for my grandfather's estate. They are trying to pressure me into settling by attacking my job." I placed a thick folder on her desk. "These are my login logs for the last 6 months," I said. "These are my case files. You can cross-reference every search I have made with an active docket number. I have never searched for Daniel Torres. I have never searched for Veronica Torres. I have never searched for Gregory Harlan. I am clean." Caroline opened the folder. She spent 10 minutes reading, her face unreadable. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second feeling like a tiny hammer on my nerves. Finally, she closed the folder. "It looks clean," she admitted. "But Fiona, perception is reality in this job. We serve at the pleasure of the public. If the public thinks you are dirty, you are useless to me. I can't put you in front of a jury if half of them think you are a crook." She leaned forward. "I am going to back you on this. I will tell the commission we ran an internal audit and found 0 evidence of misconduct. But you are on thin ice. If you even jaywalk in a way that ends up on the news, I will have to put you on administrative leave. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you." Caroline. I walked out of her office feeling like I had just dodged a bullet, only to realize I was still standing on a firing range. We need to stop playing defense, Noah said when I called him. They are controlling the narrative. They are the victims. You are the predator. We need to flip the script. We need to prove that they are the predators. How? I asked. Walter's notebooks show they asked for money. But asking for money isn't a crime. Being a bad daughter isn't a crime. No, Noah said. But why did they need the money? Your father claims he is a successful businessman. Veronica claims she is a socialite. Why did they need $650,000 over 20 years? Where did it go? The answer came 2 days later, in the form of an email sent to my personal account from a Proton mail address. The subject line was simply, "Your father." I opened it. Ms. Torres. I read the article in the Tribune. I saw your father crying about how much he misses his dad. It made me sick. I used to be the accountant for Torres Logistics. I was fired 4 years ago because I refused to cook the books. Your father is not a victim. He is a gambling addict. He didn't borrow money from your grandfather for business expansion. He borrowed it to cover losses at the Riverboat Casino in Joliet and an underground sports book in Chicago. He calls your grandfather the ATM. Attached are the ledger pages I saved before they locked me out of the system. Check the dates of the loans against the dates of his losses. Good luck. I stared at the screen. My hands were trembling. I clicked the attachment. It was a PDF. Columns of numbers. Dates. I pulled out Walter's notebooks. My grandfather's meticulous record of every time Daniel had asked for money. June 12th. Daniel asked for $20,000. I looked at the accountant's ledger. June 11th. Withdrawal. $22,000. Memo. Joliet settlement. August 4th. Daniel asked for $5,000 for medical bills. August 3rd. Credit card payment. $4,800. Vendor. DraftKings. It matched. It all matched. Every single time they had claimed a crisis, claimed a business emergency, claimed a health scare. It was just Daniel covering a bad bet. They hadn't just neglected Walter. They had bled him dry to feed an addiction. I forwarded the email to Noah. He called me 30 seconds later. I found the IP address, Noah said, his voice buzzing with excitement. And I found the ex-employee. Her name is Paula Knox. She lives in Naperville now. I am driving out to see her tonight. Will she testify? I asked. She signed a non-disclosure agreement when she was fired, Noah said. But NDAs don't cover criminal fraud, and they certainly don't cover perjury. If Daniel lies on the stand about where that money went, she is free to talk. I will get her on board, but we need to keep her name out of the filings until the very last second. We don't want them getting to her. Do it, I said, while Noah was hunting down our star witness. My phone buzzed with a text message. The number was blocked, but I knew who it was immediately. Fiona, it is Veronica. This has gone too far. Dad is a wreck. Can we meet? Just us, no lawyers. Let's resolve this as a family. I stared at the phone. It was a trap. They were feeling the heat. Maybe they knew about Paula Knox. Maybe they just wanted to bully me in person without lawyers present. I typed back, where? The Blackbird Cafe on 4th Street. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I called Noah. Don't go, he said immediately. It is a setup. They will try to get you to say something incriminating. I know, I said, but I need them to say something incriminating, in Illinois, if there is no expectation of privacy, or if one party consents to the recording for the purpose of obtaining evidence of a crime, and I consider their fraud a crime, it gets murky. But in the state of Wisconsin, where the assault happened, or under federal rules, it is one-party consent. We are in Illinois, Noah warned. Be careful. But if you are just meeting to talk settlement, and they happen to admit to the assault, that is impeachment material. It proves they are liars. I am going, I said. The Blackbird Cafe was quiet at 10 in the morning. It smelled of roasted beans and rain. I chose a booth in the back corner, away from the door. I placed my phone face down on the table. the voice memo app already running. I had a second recorder in my purse, just in case. They walked in 5 minutes late. Veronica was wearing large sunglasses and a trench coat, looking like a spy in a bad movie. Daniel looked tired, his face gray and puffy. They slid into the booth opposite me. They did not order coffee. "Fiona," Daniel started, his voice wheedling. "You look tired?" "I am tired, Dad," I said, keeping my hands on the table. "My parents are suing me. It is exhausting." "We don't want to sue you," Veronica said, taking off her sunglasses. Her eyes were hard, scanning my face. "We just want what is fair." Grandpa was old. He was confused. "We know you put ideas in his head." "He wasn't confused," I said. "He knew exactly where every dollar went. He knew about the gambling. Dad." Daniel flinched. His eyes darted to Veronica. "I don't know what you are talking about," Daniel said, his voice tightening. "I made investments. Some worked, some didn't." "Is that what you call the riverboat casino?" I asked. "An investment?" "Stop it," Veronica hissed. She leaned across the table. "Look, we are willing to make a deal. You keep the house in Maple Ridge. It is a dump anyway. We split the cash and the portfolio 50-50. We drop the lawsuit. The press goes away. You get your life back." "And if I say no?" I asked. "Then we keep going," Veronica said, smiling thinly. "We will drag this out for years. We will ruin your reputation. By the time we are done, you won't be able to get a job as a paralegal, let alone a prosecutor." "Why do you hate me so much?" I asked. I needed to pivot. I needed the red dress. "Is this still about that Christmas?" Veronica laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Oh, get over it. You are so dramatic." "You hit me, Veronica," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "You slapped me, and you shoved me into a table because I wore a red dress." "I slapped you because you were being a disrespectful little brat," Veronica snapped, her voice rising. "You came into my house, on my Christmas party, wearing the same color as me. You did it to mock me. You did it to steal the attention. You always had to be the center of the world." "So you admit it," I said. "You hit me because of a dress." "I hit you because you needed to be taught a lesson," Veronica said, her mask slipping completely. "It was my night, and you ruined it." I looked at Daniel. "And you stood there and watched. You told me not to make a scene." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fiona, if you had just been a little smarter, if you had just gone upstairs and changed, none of that would have happened. You provoked her. If you were a better daughter, there wouldn't have been any drama." "If I was a better daughter," I repeated slowly, "so me bleeding on the floor was my fault?" "It was just a slap, for God's sake," Daniel exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table. "Stop acting like you are a victim of a war crime. You were 21, not 5. You pushed her buttons. She snapped. It happens. Families fight. But you hold on to it. You used it to turn Walter against us." "I didn't turn him against you," I said. "You did that all by yourselves." "Are you going to take the deal or not?" Veronica demanded. "Half, or we burn you down." I looked at them. I looked at the greed in their eyes, the absolute lack of remorse. They truly believed they were entitled to everything. The money, the apology, the narrative. They didn't just want the inheritance, they want to erase the past. I reached out and picked up my phone. I stopped the recording. "No," I said. "No?" Veronica blinked. "You are making a mistake." "I don't think so," I said. I stood up. "See, the thing about undue influence claims is that they rely on the character of the people involved. You just admitted, on tape, to physically assaulting me and blaming me for it. And Dad, you just admitted to covering it up." Veronica's face went pale. Her eyes dropped to the phone in my hand. You can't record us," she stammered. "That is illegal." "Actually," I said, channeling every ounce of courtroom ice I possessed, "we are in a public place with no expectation of privacy, and even if we weren't, This is evidence of extortion. My lawyer will be in touch. I threw a $20 bill on the table for the coffee I didn't drink. Enjoy the coffee, I said. It is the last thing you are getting from me. I walked out into the rain, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had the financial records, I had the witness, and now I had the confession. They had started this war thinking they were fighting a scared little girl. They had forgotten that the girl grew up, went to law school, and learned exactly how to sharpen a knife. I sat in my car and played back the recording. I hit you because you needed to be taught a lesson. I saved the file to the cloud. Then I emailed it to Noah. Subject: the smoking gun. It was time to go to trial. The trial began on a Tuesday that was gray and weeping with rain, a fitting backdrop for the autopsy of a family that was about to take place in courtroom 4. The gallery was packed. The article in the Tribune and Daniel's tearful television performance had done their job. Half the people in the seats were there to see the greedy prosecutor get her comeuppance. The other half were reporters, sharks smelling blood in the water. Gregory Harlan started his case with a strategy that was as predictable as it was insulting. He wanted to paint my grandfather, Walter Hayes, not as the sharp, principled jurist he was, but as a feeble, confused old man who had been clay in my hands. Walter Hayes was 82 years old when he died, Gregory told the court, pacing in front of the jury box. He was lonely. He was grieving the loss of his wife, and in that vulnerability, he became dependent on the one person who controlled his access to the world, the defendant, Fiona Torres. Gregory called a parade of witnesses who barely knew Walter. There was a neighbor who had moved in 3 years ago and had only spoken to Walter over the fence. There was a former clerk who hadn't seen Walter in a decade. They all used vague, rehearsed phrases. He seemed frail, the neighbor said. He talked about Fiona a lot. It seemed like he was obsessed with her approval. He was forgetful, the clerk claimed. I saw him at the grocery store once, and he didn't recognize me immediately. I sat at the defense table next to Noah, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. It took every ounce of my self-control not to stand up and scream. They were turning a man of intellect into a caricature of senility. But Noah was calm. When it was our turn, he did not rely on anecdotes. He relied on science. The defense calls Dr. Eris Thorne, Noah announced. Dr. Thorne was the chief neurologist at Lakeshore General Hospital. He was a man of few words and zero patience for legal theatrics. He walked to the stand, adjusted his glasses, and opened a thick medical file. Dr. Thorne, Noah asked, standing at the podium, did you treat Walter Hayes? I did, the doctor replied, for 6 years. Did Mr. Hayes suffer from dementia or Alzheimer's disease? No, Dr. Thorne said firmly. Mr. Hayes had congestive heart failure. His heart was weak. His brain, however, was functioning in the 95th percentile for a man of his age. We conducted a mini-mental state examination 6 months before his death. He scored a 29 out of 30. Most 40-year-olds do not score a 29. Noah walked to the evidence table and picked up a document. So, in your medical opinion, was Walter Hayes capable of making complex financial decisions? Absolutely, Dr. Thorne said. He could debate the finer points of contract law with me while I was checking his blood pressure. The man was as sharp as a tack until the day he died. Gregory tried to cross-examine, suggesting that emotional grief could mimic dementia, but Dr. Thorne shut him down with a withered look. The senile old man narrative was dead in the water. Next came Marcia Lowell. If Dr. Thorne was the shield, Marcia was the sword. She took the stand with the air of a woman who had drafted more wills than Gregory Harlan had read books. She testified that Walter had not changed his will suddenly or under duress. Mr. Hayes updated his estate plan 4 times in the last 10 years. Marcia explained to the jury, her voice crisp. Each time, he reduced the percentage allocated to Daniel and Veronica Torres, and each time, he dictated a memo explaining exactly why. And what were those reasons? Noah asked. Neglect, Marcia stated simply. He noted that as his health declined, Their requests for money increased, while their visits decreased. The final change, the one that made Ms. Torres the sole beneficiary, occurred 2 weeks after Eleanor Hayes died. Walter told me, and I quote, "If they cannot spare the time to bury their mother, they do not deserve to inherit her home." The jury shifted in their seats. I saw a few of them glance at Daniel and Veronica, who were staring straight ahead, their faces stiff. Then came the financial expert. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the math. Noah put up a large chart on an easel facing the jury. It was a timeline spanning 20 years. A red line tracked the money flowing out of Walter's accounts. A blue line tracked the major life events of Daniel and Veronica. "Can you summarize the total amount transferred from Walter Hayes to the plaintiffs over the last 2 decades?" Noah asked the forensic accountant. $652,400, the accountant said. A gasp rippled through the gallery. That was not pocket change. That was a fortune. "And how were these transfers characterized?" Noah asked. "Loans," the accountant said. "Emergency assistance, medical bills." "Let us look at Exhibit C," Noah said, pointing to a specific data point on the chart. June 15th, 5 years ago, a transfer of $12,000. The memo in Mr. Hayes's checkbook reads, "Daniel, emergency surgery." Can you tell us what Daniel Torres's bank records show for that same week? The accountant flipped a page. On June 16th, Daniel Torres deposited $12,000. On June 17th, he paid $12,000 to the winding-up fund of a luxury car dealership in Chicago to settle a lease on a Porsche 911. The courtroom buzzed. "And here," Noah continued, merciless. "August 3rd, $5,000 for Veronica's treatment. What do the credit card records show?" "A charge of $5,200 at the Hermes boutique in Chicago," the accountant read. "And finally," Noah said, his voice dropping an octave, "October of last year, the week Eleanor Hayes was in the hospital dying. The plaintiffs claimed they could not afford the flight from Chicago to visit. Did you find any discretionary spending that week?" "Yes," the accountant said. "A charge of $3,000 for a weekend package at a spa resort in Lake Geneva." The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a narrative shattering. The loving, struggling parents were revealed to be liars who prioritized handbags and spa weekends over their dying mother. Judge Brock leaned forward. She had been taking notes furiously, but now she set her pen down. She looked over her spectacles at the plaintiff's table. "Mrs. Torres," Judge Brock said. She did not ask her to take the stand. She just addressed her directly from the bench, a breach of protocol that showed just how thin her patience was wearing. "You stated in your deposition that you were too distraught to visit often." Veronica stood up, looking startled. "Yes, Your Honor, it was very painful to see them aging." "I see," the judge said, her voice dry. "I am looking at the defendant's timeline here. Ms. Torres graduated from high school, college, and law school. She was sworn in as a prosecutor. That is 4 major ceremonies. You attended none of them. You lived 2 hours away. You were accepting thousands of dollars a month from your father. Why were you not there?" Veronica stammered. She looked at Gregory, but he could not help her. She looked at Daniel, who was staring at his shoes. "There was tension," Veronica said weakly. "Fiona made it very difficult. She was always hostile. We didn't want to cause a scene." "So you skipped your daughter's law school graduation to avoid a scene," Judge Brock repeated. "But you cashed the check your father sent you that same week for travel expenses." Veronica went pale. She sat down without answering. Noah seized the momentum. "Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce Exhibit D, the journals of Eleanor Hayes." I watched as the bailiff handed the worn, leather-bound notebooks to the jury foreman. Eleanor Hayes kept a record, Noah told the jury. She called it her scorecard. For 20 years, she wrote down every promise Daniel and Veronica made and every promise they broke. Promise to come for Easter, canceled. Promise to come for Walter's birthday, no show. And next to those entries, She recorded the presence of Fiona Torres. Noah turned to me. Fiona Torres was there for the shingles. She was there for the broken hip. She was there for the leaking roof. She was there for the Tuesday night dinners. The jury passed the books around. I saw a woman in the back row wipe her eye. They were holding the physical weight of my grandmother's disappointment. Gregory Harlan looked like a man watching his house burn down. He needed to stop the bleeding. He needed to disrupt the rhythm. He stood up abruptly. "Your Honor," Gregory said, his voice loud and desperate. "The defense is painting a pretty picture, but we have heard enough from accountants and diaries. We want to hear from the manipulator herself. The plaintiffs call Fiona Torres to the stand." It was a gamble. Usually, the defendant testifies last, but Gregory wanted to rattle me. He wanted to get me up there while the emotion of the journals was still raw, hoping I would snap. He wanted the angry, bitter daughter to show her face. I looked at Noah. He nodded slightly. "Go." I walked to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down and smoothed my skirt. My heart was pounding, but my face was stone. I was a prosecutor. I lived on the stand. Gregory marched up to the podium. He didn't smile. He looked aggressive. "Ms. Torres," he began, "you hated your stepmother, didn't you?" "I did not hate her," I said calmly. "I was disappointed by her." "Disappointed," Gregory sneered. "That is a mild word. You haven't spoken to your father or his wife in 7 years. You cut them out of your life completely." "I removed myself from a toxic environment," I corrected. "And during those 7 years," Gregory pressed, leaning in, "you were the only one talking to Walter Hayes. You were the one whispering in his ear. You told him they were bad people, didn't you? You told him they were greedy. You told him they didn't love him." "I told him the truth," I said. "You poisoned him against his own children," Gregory shouted, trying to provoke me. "You used your influence to make him hate them so you could take everything. Admit it. You wanted revenge for whatever petty grievances you had, and you used a dying man to get it." The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on me. This was the trap. If I got angry, if I yelled, I would look like the unstable woman they claimed I was. I looked at Gregory, then I looked past him, at Daniel and Veronica. Daniel was refusing to look at me. Veronica was watching with a sneer, waiting for me to explode. I thought about the night in the snow. I thought about the slap. I thought about the years of silence. I took a breath. "Mr. Harlan," I said, my voice steady and low, carrying to the back of the room without effort. I never had to tell my grandfather that his children were greedy. He had their bank account numbers. I never had to tell him they didn't love him. He had a calendar full of days they didn't show up. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I didn't manipulate him," I continued. "I just told him who was sitting at his dinner table on Sundays. I told him who was holding his hand when he was scared. I just told him who was there." He looked at the empty chairs, and he decided the rest for himself. Gregory opened his mouth to retort, but he stopped. He looked at the jury. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at me. And for the first time, they weren't seeing a defendant. They were seeing a granddaughter who had done the work. "No further questions," Gregory muttered, retreating to his table. I stepped down from the stand. As I walked back to my seat, I felt a shift in the air pressure of the room. The story of the poor, abandoned parents had evaporated. In its place, the cold, hard reality of 20 years of neglect was beginning to take shape. And we hadn't even played the tape yet. Gregory Harlan was not done with me yet. He paced in front of the witness stand, his face flushed with the frustration of a man whose carefully constructed narrative was unraveling. He knew he could not win on the financial facts. The ledgers were too damning. So he decided to attack the only thing he had left, my sanity. "Ms. Torres," Gregory said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, "let us go back to that night, the night you claim you were assaulted. You were 21 years old. You were under a lot of academic pressure. You were emotional." I watched him, my hands resting still on my lap. I was a law student. I was not unstable. Weren't you? Gregory snapped, spinning around to face the jury. We have a different account of that evening. My clients recall a young woman who had too much to drink, a young woman who started screaming because she didn't get enough attention. They recall you throwing a glass against the wall. They recall you throwing yourself onto the floor in a tantrum, cutting your own lip in the process. A murmur rippled through the gallery. It was a disgusting lie, but it was a specific one. He was painting a picture of a hysterical girl, not a victim. That is a lie, I said clearly. Is it? Gregory pressed, leaning over the railing. Veronica Torres simply raised her hand to protect herself from your outburst. It was self-defense against a spiraling, jealous stepdaughter, and you have spent the last 7 years rewriting that memory to turn your own mental breakdown into their crime. He looked at me with a smirk. Admit it, Ms. Torres. You weren't beaten. You were just a mess. I looked at Judge Brock. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, I would like permission to state the events of that night exactly as they happened. Counsel has opened the door to the specifics of the altercation. Judge Brock looked at Gregory, then at me. Proceed, Ms. Torres, but keep it factual. I turned my chair slightly so I was facing the jury. I wanted them to see my eyes. I wanted them to see that I was not the hysterical child Gregory was describing. I arrived at the North Elmwood house at 6 p.m, I began. I was wearing a red wool dress that my grandmother Eleanor had given me. It was modest. It was high-necked. When I walked downstairs, Veronica was wearing a red sequined gown. She was angry immediately. Throughout the night, she made comments about me trying to upstage her. I took a breath. The memory was sharp, cutting through the years like a shard of glass. When the guests left, I was kneeling on the floor picking up a napkin. Veronica came in. She was intoxicated. She told me I was ungrateful. She told me I was trying to steal her spotlight. She slapped me across the face with an open hand. It was not a defensive move. It was a strike. When I stood up, she shoved me backward. I fell into the corner of the oak coffee table. That is how I bruised my shoulder and cut my lip. I looked directly at Daniel, who was studying the grain of the wood on the table. My father was standing in the doorway, I said. He was holding a glass of scotch. He watched me bleed. He did not call a doctor. He did not help me up. He told me not to make a scene and to stop causing drama for his wife. Gregory scoffed loudly. This is all very moving, Ms. Torres, but it is just your word against theirs. It is a subjective memory of a traumatic event. You interpret a chaotic family argument as assault. They interpret it as managing a difficult child. There is no proof. Noah stood up at the defense table. He moved slowly, deliberately. Your Honor, Noah said, the defense moves to introduce Exhibit F. This is a digital audio recording taken 2 weeks ago at the Blackbird Cafe. Gregory froze. Objection! Unauthorized recording. It was recorded in a public place during a settlement discussion initiated by the plaintiffs, Noah countered smoothly. It is admissible for impeachment purposes. Your Honor, Mr. Harlan just claimed his clients acted in self-defense. This recording speaks directly to that claim. Judge Brock adjusted her glasses. I will allow it. Play the tape. The courtroom went deadly silent. Noah connected his laptop to the audio system. First came the sound of clinking cups and the low hum of cafe chatter. Then, clear as a bell, Veronica's voice cut through the room. I hit you because you needed to be taught a lesson. The juror's head snapped toward the plaintiff's table. Veronica put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The recording continued. My voice on the tape was calm. So you admit it. You hit me because of a dress. Then Veronica again, shrill and arrogant. It was my night, and you ruined it. And then, the final nail in the coffin. Daniel's voice, tired, dismissive, and utterly damning. If you were a better daughter, there wouldn't have been any drama. It was just a slap. For God's sake, stop acting like you are a victim of a war crime. Noah stopped the tape. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a carefully crafted image shattering into a million pieces. The heartbroken mother, was gone. In her place sat a woman who believed violence was a teaching tool. The grieving father was gone. In his place was a man who called his daughter's pain drama. I watched the jury. They looked disgusted. A woman in the front row crossed her arms and glared at Daniel. The reporters in the back were typing furiously. "Mr. Harlan," Judge Brock said, her voice icy, "do you have any further questions for the witness regarding her subjective memory?" Gregory looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "No, Your Honor." I stepped down from the stand. I did not feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. But as I sat down next to Noah, he gave me a small nod. We had broken their line. Now, we had to bury them. "The defense calls Paula Knox," Noah announced. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Paula walked in. She was a small woman with sensible shoes and a nervous demeanor, but she walked with the determination of someone who had been holding a secret for too long. She took the stand, swore the oath, and sat down. "Ms. Knox," Noah began, "how were you employed between the years of 2015 and 2019? "I was the senior accountant for Torres Logistics," Paula said. Her voice shook slightly, but it gained strength as she spoke. "I handled the personal and business accounts for Daniel Torres." "Why did you leave that employment?" Noah asked. "I was fired," Paula stated. "Why?" "Because I refused to reclassify personal gambling debts as business expenses," Paula said. Daniel jumped up. "This is absurd. She is a disgruntled employee." "Sit down. Mr. Torres," Judge Brock barked, banging her gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." Noah continued, unfazed. "Ms. Knox, can you explain the nature of the transfers from Walter Hayes?" "Mr. Torres called them injections," Paula explained. "Whenever he had a bad week at the casinos, usually the Riverboat in Joliet, he would call Mr. Hayes with a story. Sometimes it was a payroll issue. Sometimes it was a medical emergency. As soon as the wire hit the business account, Mr. Torres would have me transfer it to his personal account to pay the bookies." "Did Mr. Torres ever refer to his father-in-law by any specific name regarding these finances?" Noah asked. "Yes," Paula said. She looked directly at Daniel. "He called him the Mobile ATM. I have a text message saved on my work phone, which I preserved. It says, 'The mobile ATM just dispensed. We are clear for the weekend.'" The jury looked horrified. The image of Walter Hayes, a distinguished judge, a war veteran, a man of honor, being reduced to a mobile ATM by his own son-in-law, was visceral. It stripped away any lingering sympathy. Gregory Harlan tried to salvage the wreck on cross-examination. He stood up, buttoning his jacket aggressively. "Ms. Knox," Gregory said, "you signed a non-disclosure agreement when you were terminated, did you not?" "I did," Paula said. "And you received a severance package of $5,000 in exchange for your silence?" "I did." "So you are in breach of contract," Gregory accused. "You are breaking your word. Why should this jury trust a woman who takes money to stay quiet and then talks anyway? Do you have a vendetta against Mr. Torres?" Paula leaned into the microphone. She looked tired of being bullied. "I don't have a vendetta," she said. "I have a conscience. I signed that paper because I needed to pay my rent. But when I saw him on television, crying about how much he loved that old man, knowing he laughed about stealing from him, I couldn't keep quiet. An NDA covers trade secrets. Sir, it doesn't cover abuse." Gregory opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He knew he had lost. He sat down. Judge Brock looked at the clock. It was late afternoon, but she did not dismiss us yet. She turned her gaze back to me. I was sitting at the defense table, watching the dust motes dance in the light from the high windows. "Ms. Torres," Judge Brock said. I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor?" "I want to ask you a question," the judge said. Her tone was not judicial anymore. It was human. "You have sat here and listened to that recording. You have heard your parents minimize what happened to you. You have heard them call it drama, as a prosecutor and as a daughter. What goes through your mind when you hear that?" The room went still. It was the question everyone wanted to ask. I looked at the judge. Then I looked at the recording device sitting on the evidence table. "It is not the physical pain, Your Honor," I said. "The bruise on my shoulder healed in 2 weeks. The cut on my lip healed in 10 days. I took a deep breath, letting the truth of it settle in the room. "The pain comes from the rewriting of reality," I said. "When you are hit by someone who is supposed to love you, that is a tragedy. But when they tell you afterward that it was your fault, when they tell you that your bleeding lip is just you being dramatic, that is when they break you. They don't just hurt your body, they make you doubt your own mind. They make you believe that you are the villain in your own assault." I looked at Veronica. She was staring at the table, her face pale and drawn. She looked small. "Hearing that tape," I continued, "doesn't make me sad. It makes me relieved, because for 7 years, a small part of me wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was difficult. Maybe I did provoke it. But hearing them today, hearing the cruelty in their voices, I know now that I wasn't the problem. I was just the target, and I am done being the target." I sat down. There was no whispering in the gallery this time, no rustling of papers. The silence was absolute. It was the heavy, reverent silence that comes when the truth finally walks into the room and sits down. I saw a reporter in the second row, the same one who had asked me if I ruined the family. Close his notebook. He looked at me, and then he looked at Daniel and Veronica with an expression of pure disdain. The narrative had flipped. This was no longer a story about a greedy daughter stealing an inheritance. It was a story about a survivor escaping a house of mirrors. And for the first time in 7 years, the glass was shattered. The morning of the 3rd day of the trial felt different. The air in the courtroom was not heavy with humidity anymore. It was heavy with anticipation. We had chipped away at their lies with ledgers and audio recordings. But today, Noah told me, we were going to bring down the hammer. "Your Honor," Noah said, standing at the defense table. He held a thick, cream-colored envelope in his hand. The red wax seal had been broken, but the paper was pristine. "The defense moves to introduce Exhibit H, a handwritten letter from the decedent, Walter Hayes, addressed to the presiding probate judge." Gregory Harlan shot out of his chair. "Objection. This is highly irregular. We have not authenticated this document. It is hearsay. It is a sentimental scrap of paper written by a lonely old man, not a legal instrument." "The letter was found in the same lockbox as the will," Noah countered, his voice calm. "It is dated the same week the final codicil was signed. It is accompanied by a sworn affidavit from Marcia Lowell, attesting that she witnessed him writing it, and the medical records from Dr. Thorne confirming that on that specific date, Walter Hayes scored a 29 out of 30 on his cognitive exam. This is not a scrap of paper, Your Honor. It is a statement of intent." Judge Brock extended her hand. "Bring it up." She read the letter in silence. The courtroom waited. I watched her eyes move back and forth across the page. I saw her jaw tighten. "The objection is overruled," Judge Brock said, handing the letter back to the bailiff. "The court accepts Exhibit H, Mr. Mercer. You may read it into the record." Noah walked to the center of the room. He held the letter up so the jury could see the shaky but determined handwriting of my grandfather. To the court. Noah read, "I am leaving the majority of my estate to my granddaughter, Fiona Torres. I do this not out of confusion, but out of clarity. In the last 22 years, I have learned that family is a verb. It requires action. My daughter and her husband chose absence. They chose to be busy. They chose to be elsewhere. Fiona chose presence. She chose to be the one who drove me to chemotherapy. She chose to be the one who fixed the fence. She chose to be the one who sat in the silence. I am not punishing my children. I am simply acknowledging the reality they created. They invested their time elsewhere. Fiona invested hers here. This inheritance is merely the return on that investment." Noah lowered the paper. Signed, Walter Hayes. I looked at the jury. They were not looking at me with pity anymore. They were nodding. It was a logic they understood. You reap what you sow. Gregory looked desperate. He leaned over and whispered furiously to Veronica. She shook her head, her face a mask of tight, controlled rage. We have one more piece of evidence regarding the plaintiff's credibility, Noah said. He picked up a stack of files. The plaintiffs claim that this lawsuit is a specific, unique reaction to their concern for Walter Hayes. They claim they have never been litigious before. However, public records tell a different story. Noah placed the files on the evidence table. Exhibit Y, Noah announced. Court records from the state of Ohio. 10 years ago, Veronica Torres Vaz, the estate of Martha Higgins, a distant aunt. Veronica contested the will claiming undue influence by the caretaker. Case dismissed. Exhibit J, Noah continued, slamming another file down. 5 years ago, Veronica and Daniel Torres Vav, the estate of Arthur Prynne, a second cousin, contested the will claiming undue influence by a neighbor, settled out of court for $20,000. Objection, Gregory shouted. Prior litigation is irrelevant. It establishes a pattern, Your Honor, Noah said sharply. This is not about grief. This is a business model. The plaintiffs wait for a relative to die. Then they sue the caregiver claiming manipulation, hoping for a settlement. Fiona Torres is just the latest target in a long line of victims. The gallery buzzed. Veronica looked like she wanted to scream. Her strategy of playing the victim had just been exposed as a serial grift. Gregory knew he was losing. He was watching his contingency fee evaporate. He needed a Hail Mary. He needed to make the jury forget the facts and feel something. The plaintiffs called Daniel Torres to the stand, Gregory said. It was a risky move. Daniel had been exposed as a gambler and a liar by Paula Knox, but Gregory was banking on the fact that Daniel was still my father. He was banking on the primal bond of blood. Daniel walked to the stand. He looked smaller than I remembered. His expensive suit seemed to hang off him. He sat down and looked at the jury with wide, wet eyes. Mr. Torres, Gregory asked softly, you have heard a lot of accusations today, about gambling, about lawsuits, but let us talk about your heart. Why are you really here? Daniel took a shaky breath. He looked at me. It was a practiced look of longing. I just want my daughter back, he said, his voice cracking. I know I have made mistakes. I know I wasn't perfect. But Fiona, she shut us out. She has always been cold, even as a child. She was distant. She hated Veronica from the day I married her. She didn't want us to be a family. She wanted to punish me for remarrying. He wiped a tear. I didn't sue because I want the money. I have plenty of money. I sued because I wanted to stop her from erasing us. She brainwashed my dad into thinking we didn't care. Just like she is trying to convince this jury we don't care. But I do care. I am a father. And it kills me that my little girl hates me this much. It was a good performance. I saw a few jurors soften. The father trying to reach a difficult daughter narrative was a powerful trope. Gregory sat down, looking pleased. Your witness. Noah stood up. He did not bring a notepad. He brought a calendar. Mr. Torres, Noah said, walking to the podium. You say you want your daughter back. You say you were always trying, but she shut you out. Is that correct? Yes, Daniel said firmly. She wouldn't let us in. Let us look at the timeline, Noah said. He projected a slide onto the courtroom screen. It was a timeline of my life. May 22nd, 7 years ago, Noah said. Fiona's graduation from law school. She was valedictorian. Did she invite you? Daniel shifted in his seat. I think so. She did, Noah said. We have the certified mail receipt. You signed for the invitation 3 months in advance. Did you attend? I had a business crisis, Daniel muttered. Noah clicked a button. A photo appeared on the screen. It was me in my cap and gown, smiling, standing next to Walter and Eleanor. To my left, there were 2 empty folding chairs. June 10th, 4 years ago, Noah continued. Fiona was sworn in as an assistant district attorney, a massive career milestone. Did you attend? I was out of town, Daniel said. Noah clicked again. Another photo. Me holding the Bible. Walter standing next to me. In the background, empty seats. August 4th, 3 years ago, Noah said. Fiona underwent emergency appendectomy surgery. She was in the hospital for 2 days. Did you visit? I didn't know, Daniel lied. We have phone records showing Walter called you 3 times, Noah said. You sent a text message saying, hope she feels better. Send Bill. Did you visit? No, Daniel whispered. Kindy. So, Noah said, leaning on the podium, you missed the graduation, you missed the swearing in, you missed the surgery, you missed 22 Christmases out of 24, and yet, you want this jury to believe that Fiona pushed you away? I was working, Daniel snapped, his facade cracking. I was building a future for her. I was paying the bills. Actually, Noah said, according to the evidence provided by Ms. Knox, Walter Hayes was paying your bills. But let us move on. Noah walked back to the table and picked up a USB drive. Mr. Torres, you testified just now that you don't care about the money. You said, and I quote, I have plenty of money. Is that true? Yes, Daniel said. My business is thriving. And you testified that this lawsuit is solely about emotional reconnection? Yes. Noah turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit K, a voicemail retrieved from the cloud server of Mr. Marcus Webb. Mr. Webb is a known associate of the plaintiff. This voicemail was left by Daniel Torres 3 days before this lawsuit was filed. Gregory stood up. Objection. Privacy. Mr. Webb was subpoenaed and provided the recording voluntarily, Noah said. It is admissible. Play it, Judge Brock commanded. The audio filled the room. It was Daniel's voice, but it wasn't the sad, soft voice he used on the stand. It was loud, brash, and slurring slightly, like he had been drinking. Hey, Marcus, it is Dan. Look, I can't pay you the 50 grand yet, but hold off on the legs. All right? The old man kicked the bucket. We are filing the suit on Monday. Veronica has it all mapped out. We are going to claim the girl manipulated him. Once we break the will, Veronica and I take the house and the trust fund. That is $13 million. Easy. The girl doesn't have the cash to fight us. We will bleed her dry in legal fees and she will settle. Fiona has been working for us her whole life. She just doesn't know it yet. I will have your money in 6 months. The recording ended with a click. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. I looked at Daniel. His face had gone the color of ash. He looked like a ghost. I looked at Veronica. She was staring at Daniel with eyes that were not just angry. They were murderous. He had just admitted, on record, to conspiracy, fraud, and perjury. Noah let the silence stretch for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a long time in a courtroom. It is enough time for a lie to die. Mr. Torres, Noah said softly, you told your bookie that you were going to bleed me dry. You told him I had been working for you my whole life. Is that what you mean by wanting your daughter back? You wanted her back so you could cash her out? Daniel stammered. He looked at the jury. They were looking at him with open revulsion. I didn't mean, it was just talk. I was drunk. You lied under oath, Noah said. You lied about your motives. You lied about your finances. You lied about your father. It wasn't my idea, Daniel shouted suddenly. The room gasped. Excuse me? Noah asked. Daniel was trembling now. Sweat was pouring down his forehead. He looked at Veronica, then back at Noah. He was a rat trapped in a corner, and he was doing what rats do. He was biting. It wasn't my idea to sue, Daniel yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Veronica. She made me do it. She said we were broke. She said the creditors were coming for the house. She told me that if we didn't get the trust fund, we would lose everything. She said Fiona was weak. She said, crush her, Daniel, or we are on the street. Veronica stood up, slamming her hands on the table. You coward! You pathetic, lying coward! Sit down, Judge Brock roared, banging her gavel so hard I thought the handle would snap. Both of you, sit down now. But Daniel was broken. The dam had burst. "I didn't want to hurt her," Daniel sobbed, looking at me. "Fiona, I swear. Veronica told me you stole it. She said you tricked Dad. She told me I had to do it to save us. I just did what she said. I always do what she says." "Mr. Harlan," Judge Brock said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury, "control your client, or I will have the bailiff shackle him." Gregory looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. He grabbed Daniel by the arm and forced him into his chair. Daniel buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Veronica sat rigidly, staring straight ahead, refusing to look at the husband who had just thrown her to the wolves to save his own skin. Noah looked at me. He didn't smile. It was too tragic for a smile. He just nodded. "No further questions, Your Honor," Noah said. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had stood by and watched while I bled on a hardwood floor. I looked at the man who had just admitted that his entire attempt to reconnect with me was a heist. And strangely, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt light. The weight of hoping he loved me was finally gone. You cannot mourn what never existed. I looked at the jury. They weren't looking at a family dispute anymore. They were looking at a crime scene. And they knew exactly who was holding the smoking gun. The silence that followed Daniel's confession was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. The jury looked at my father with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Gregory Harlan had his head in his hands, knowing that no amount of legal maneuvering could unring the bell of a client admitting to fraud on the stand. Judge Brock did not call for a recess. She did not ask the jury to retire to the deliberation room to weigh the complexities of the law. In civil cases of this nature, when the evidence is this overwhelming and the plaintiff admits to bad faith, the judge has the discretion to accelerate the inevitable. She looked at the jury box, then at the defense table, and finally at the plaintiffs. "The court has heard enough," Judge Brock said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of iron. "We have seen financial records proving a 20-year pattern of exploitation. We have heard audio recordings of the plaintiffs admitting to assault and minimizing domestic abuse, and now we have heard the plaintiff, Mr. Torres, admit under oath that this lawsuit was filed not out of genuine concern for the decedent's mental state, but as a desperate financial maneuver to cover personal debts." She stacked her papers together, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "There is no question of fact left for the jury to decide regarding the validity of the will," Judge Brock declared. "The evidence provided by Dr. Thorne and Miss Lowell is irrefutable. Walter Hayes was of sound mind. He was a man of high intellect and deep moral character, who made a deliberate, informed choice to disinherit children who saw him only as a resource." She looked directly at Veronica and Daniel. "I find that the last will and testament of Walter Hayes is valid. I find that the Hayes Integrity Trust was established legally and without undue influence. Fiona Torres is the sole beneficiary and executor." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 7 years. Noah squeezed my arm under the table. "Furthermore," the judge continued, her eyes narrowing, "given the admission of Mr. Torres that this suit was filed for the purpose of financial gain and based on false premises, I am invoking the frivolous litigation statute. The plaintiffs, Daniel and Veronica Torres, are hereby ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the estate and by the defendant. Ms. Torres, you will also cover the court costs." Veronica let out a choked sob. Daniel just stared at the wall, catatonic. Judge Brock leaned forward, removing her glasses. She looked at the reporters in the gallery, then at my parents. "Before I dismiss this court," she said, "I want to say something for the record. This court sees many family disputes. We see greed, we see anger, but rarely do we see such a clear distinction between biological entitlement and genuine care." She paused, and her next words were etched into the record and the notebooks of every reporter in the room. "Family is not measured by the photographs you take for social media or the tears you shed when the cameras are on. Family is measured by the number of times you actually show up when you are needed, Mr. Hayes understood that, and it is the judgment of this court that he chose the right heir. She banged the gavel. Case dismissed. The sound of the gavel was like a gunshot that broke the spell. The courtroom erupted into noise. Reporters were shouting questions. Noah was shaking my hand, grinning like a shark who had just eaten a whale. "We did it," Noah said. "They are done. Fiona, they are ruined." I looked over at the plaintiff's table. Gregory Harlan was packing his briefcase with frantic speed, trying to escape before the press could corner him. Daniel was still sitting there, looking like a man who had just woken up in a burning house. Veronica was standing, her face a mask of panicked calculation. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my suit. I picked up my briefcase. "Let's go," I said. We walked down the center aisle. The gallery parted for us. I saw respect in the eyes of the people who had looked at me with suspicion 3 days ago. I walked out of the heavy oak doors and into the marble hallway. We had barely taken 10 steps toward the exit when I heard the click of heels running behind me. "Fiona! Fiona! Wait!" I stopped. I turned around. Veronica was rushing toward me. Her hair was coming loose from its bun. Her eyes were wild. She ignored Noah. She ignored the cameras that were already flashing around us. She lunged forward and grabbed my hands. "Fiona!" she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, thank God it is over. It was a nightmare. That lawyer. He gave us such bad advice. But we are family. Baby, we are family." I looked down at her hands gripping mine. Her knuckles were white. "Don't let money destroy us," Veronica pleaded, her voice rising to a wail. "You heard the judge. We have to pay the fees. We can't afford that. Fiona, we will lose the house. We will lose everything. You can't let that happen to your father. He is sick. He is an addict. We need to stick together. You are all we have left." It was a masterclass in manipulation. In one breath, she was the victim of a bad lawyer. In the next, she was the martyr holding the family together. She was trying to weaponize my empathy. She was betting that the daughter who used to crave her approval was still in there somewhere. But that daughter was gone. She had died in the snow 7 years ago. I gently but firmly pulled my hands away from hers. I did not shove her. I did not yell. I stepped back, creating a foot of distance between us. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. But I also saw the calculation. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she lost. I reached up and touched the lapel of my silk blouse. It was deep crimson. "Do you remember that night, Veronica?" I asked. My voice was calm, pitched perfectly so the microphones thrust in our faces could catch every syllable. "You hit me. You shoved me into a table. You made me bleed. And you did it because I was wearing red." Veronica flinched, her eyes darting to the cameras. "That was a mistake," she whispered. I was stressed. "No," I said, cutting her off. "You did it because you thought you owned the color. You thought you owned me. You thought I was weak." I straightened my spine. I stood tall, letting the red silk catch the light. "Today," I said, "I am wearing red again. I am wearing the color you tried to beat out of me. And the difference is, today, no one has the power to raise a hand against me ever again." I turned my back on her. "Fiona!" I heard another voice, my father. Daniel had emerged from the courtroom. He looked old. He looked broken. He was standing 10 feet away, swaying slightly. "Fiona," he croaked, "I am your dad. Please." I paused. I looked at him over my shoulder. I remembered him standing in the doorway with his scotch, watching me cry. I remembered him telling me not to make a scene. "That night," I said, my voice cold and final, "you chose to stand still. You watched me bleed, and you did nothing." I looked him in the eye. "Today, I am making a different choice. I am choosing to walk away." I turned and walked through the revolving doors, out into the blinding afternoon sun. The air tasted cold and clean. Behind me, I could hear Veronica screaming at the reporters to get out of her face, but her voice sounded small. like a ghost fading into the background. I did not go back to my apartment in the city. I got in my car and drove north. I drove for 2 hours, watching the skyscrapers fade into strip malls, and the strip malls fade into cornfields and forests. I drove until I saw the sign for Maple Ridge. I pulled into the gravel driveway of the Victorian house. It was quiet. The for sale sign that Daniel had threatened to put up would never be planted here. This house was safe. I unlocked the front door. The air inside was stale, but underneath the dust, it still smelled of Eleanor's lavender and Walter's pipe tobacco. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom. I opened Eleanor's closet. Her clothes were still there, hanging in neat rows. I reached out and touched the wool of her favorite winter coat. It was red, a bright, cheerful cherry red. I took it off the hanger. I put it on. It was a little big on the shoulders, but it felt like a hug. It felt like armor. I walked out the back door into the garden. The frost had killed the flowers, but the structure of the beds Walter had built was still strong. I walked to the edge of the property, to the small family plot where 2 simple granite headstones stood side by side. Walter Hayes, Eleanor Hayes, beloved. I sat down on the stone bench Walter had placed there years ago. I pulled the red coat tighter around me against the wind. "We won," I told them. The wind rustled the dry leaves on the ground. "You were right, Grandpa," I said softly. The truth didn't need to shout. It just needed to be heard. They admitted everything. The judge saw everything. I traced the name on Eleanor's stone. "I wore red," I told her, "and I didn't take it off." I sat there for a long time, until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I didn't feel the euphoric rush of victory. I felt a deep, quiet settling in my bones. The war was over. The fortress was secure. The ghosts that had haunted me, the ghost of the unloved daughter, the ghost of the victim, were finally laid to rest. I was just Fiona now. 2 weeks later, I walked into the Riverbend County Prosecutor's office. The atmosphere was different. The whispers had stopped. When I walked past the break room, people didn't look away. They nodded. The article about the trial had run on the front page of the Sunday paper. The headline this time was, "Justice for the Judge. Prosecutor vindicates grandfather's legacy." I walked into my office and set my briefcase down. My desk was piled high with new files. The world didn't stop because I had won my personal battle. Crime didn't sleep. Caroline Vega knocked on my doorframe. She was holding a thin file. "Welcome back," she said. She didn't offer a platitude. She offered work. That was her love language. "Thanks, Caroline," I said. "I have a new one," she said, walking in and placing the file on my desk. "It came in last night. Domestic battery. Aggravated assault." I opened the file. The victim's photo was clipped to the front. She was young, maybe 22. Her lip was split. Her eye was swollen shut. "The police report says her husband hit her because she burned the roast," Caroline said, her voice tight. "He told the cops she was being dramatic and making a scene over nothing." I froze. The words were identical. Dramatic. Making a scene. "It is going to be a tough one," Caroline warned. "He is well connected. He has a fancy lawyer who is going to try to paint her as unstable. He is going to try to say she provoked him." She looked at me carefully. "Are you sure you are ready for this, Fiona? After everything you just went through? I can assign it to Miller." I looked at the photograph of the girl. I saw the fear in her eyes. I saw the confusion. She was currently standing in the middle of a storm, wondering if she was crazy, wondering if maybe it really was her fault. She needed someone to stand in front of her and tell the world that her pain was real. I closed the file and placed my hand on it. I felt the familiar weight of the red coat in my memory, the warmth of the tea Eleanor used to make, the strength of Walter's handwriting. I looked up at Caroline. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a strong one. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. "I am keeping it," I said. "You sure?" "I have experience," I replied. Caroline nodded and walked out, closing the door behind her. I sat alone in my office. I picked up my pen. I opened the file. My name is Fiona Torres. I am a prosecutor. I am a granddaughter. And I am the woman who wears red. The revenge was not just about the money, and it wasn't just about the verdict. The real revenge was taking the fire they used to burn me and turning it into a torch to guide someone else home. I started writing. Thank you so much for listening to Fiona's story. It was a long journey from that snowy night to the courtroom, but justice has a way of finding its path. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a cozy room in London, a busy street in New York, or maybe somewhere quiet in Sydney? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and your thoughts on Fiona's victory. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to show your support, and don't forget to press the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people. Your support helps us tell the stories that need to be told. See you in the next video.